Let's talk for a moment about the Milwaukee Road and its unique electrification. This was the first railroad that was electrified solely for economic reasons. As the last transcontinental to reach the Pacific, the Milwaukee had at its disposal a vastly different level of technology than the early transcontinental railroads had. The long distances from Midwestern coal supplies and an abundance of hydroelectric power, along with long, severe winters and difficult terrain, all underscored the advantages of electrification. Initially an unmatched technical marvel, it was thought to be the dawn of a technological revolution. That revolution never occurred, despite the operational success of the electrified system. A definitive technological revolution in 1915, it was eventually rendered obsolete by vast advances in electrical engineering. The electrification served well, but its inception was primarily a product of the need to overcome problems that did not exist in the same way by the 1970s. Initially, it was prohibitively large sum of private capital to construct, given the relatively light density of traffic. Nevertheless, the system had long since paid for itself through years of dependable and almost trouble-free service. The initial electrification in the Rocky Mountains was more successful than the Milwaukee frankly anticipated. So authorization was quickly given in 1917 to electrify the Coast Division from Othello to Tacoma and eventually Seattle. By the fall of 1919, electrical helper service was started on several grades. The line to Tacoma was completely electrified by March of 1920, and the last leg into Seattle was completed in 1927. But we all didn't come here to listen to me. We came here to listen to our two special guests, Milwaukee railroaders that worked in beautiful Cedar Falls, Washington. Let me introduce Alan Miller and Frank Zellerhoff. Welcome, guys. It's great to have you here. Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. So let's take a look at, we have a little presentation here, but the point of the presentation is for our guests to be able to share their reminiscences and stories of what it was like in Cedar Falls, because as we know now, Cedar Falls is a ghost town inside the City of Seattle watershed. So we've got a bunch of really, really cool, rare images for you to enjoy today. And I will tell you that the graphics for today's program are part of the Cascade Rail Foundation. Cascade Rail Foundation is one of the members of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. Here's a photo from the Walt Ainsworth collection on a beautiful summer day in downtown Cedar Falls. And here are a couple of pictures of the substation over the years. We can see, here's a picture of when it was originally constructed. Here is a picture of it from our Cascade Rail Foundation in its later years of operation, and here it is towards the end of its career. In a minute here, Frank's going to tell us about what all of this stuff did and how that building actually worked. But I just want to take a minute and show you that the Milwaukee Road was really, people thought it was pretty cool. They had these really interesting locomotives. They were electrified. They were, very popular. It was very much ahead of its time. They had ski trains that went to Hyak. They did all kinds of cool stuff. I might just, as a spoiler alert, let you know that we're going to be looking at a number of pictures taken by the one and only Richard Steinheimer, a very famous railroad photographer that we were able to graciously get permission to be able to use for today's presentation. And a couple of more pictures of some bipolars. These are all Ashel Curtis photos, and these are in the collection of Cascade Rail Foundation. Alan pointed out to me, crop right there, they were able to extend the life of the trolley pole by a number of years. And Alan, what year do you think this picture was?
I think that might be in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, would be my guess.
And how do you form that? What cues do you see here that help us see that?
Well, the motors, which are the electric engines, are in solid black still. Later they were painted in an orange and black scheme, I believe beginning in the mid or late 50s. So this would tell me that this predates that change there. They still have the service tank up, which means that the Everett line and Enumclaw line locomotives are still probably steam, so they need to come in and get fuel from that tank. So that kind of puts everything prior to 1950 or so.
Okay, let's look at some more pictures. Now, here's a map, and actually, Alan, I'm glad that you're here to explain this. This map is courtesy of Alan, by the way, as a number of these images are. I'm very grateful for it. Is that where the depot is?
Yeah,
Okay, about in here somewhere?
yeah,
And then the substation was about here?
right there, exactly, yep.
Okay, and then these were the bungalows?
Yeah, the 3 substation bungalows, and then there was other company houses there.
And then the beanery, the diner, was behind this too.
There was a beanery and a
A
hotel.
hotel. And then one of the things I learned today about these bungalows, we'll look at them here in more detail in a minute, is that both of these guys lived in the same bungalow at one point in time. So we'll get a chance to talk about that. You know, they worked together at Cedar Falls, but Frank and Alan never met each other till today. So I'm glad it didn't turn out to be like Jerry Springer or something. So here's the substation, and we can see here, these are the bungalows behind there. Now, which one of these did you guys live in?
The middle one.
The middle one. How about that? And then Alan ended up with the bathtub, didn't you?
Yeah,
You want to clarify the fact that we didn't live there together.
right.
Yeah, that's a good point these days.
We've
Thanks,
never
guys.
met before today.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah, they were at Cedar Falls at the same time, but Frank was in the substation and Alan was in the depot, so they were doing different things.
We had heat. We had shovel coal for a coal furnace to heat the houses, and I put oil burners, two of those houses, and a couple of them at Hyatt.
So, Frank, I want you to start talking now. We're going to start talking about the substation, folks, and how the substation worked. So, Frank, I want you to explain what's going on here and what these series of items here did. So, Frank, take it away.
Well, the metal tower that you see there is that's the wires heading east up to Hyatt. And that's 115,000 volts. So you might read or hear that 100,000, but it was up to 115,000 just prior to my tenure, which started in '69. And then those silver, what they look like, cans there with the
These right here?
Yeah, with the black stacks there. Those are insulators or bushings. And so that's a 3-phase, 115,000 volts, and like I say, it's going up to Hyatt, and that goes all the way to Othello, and it connects with Washington Water Power, and this end, well, it doesn't show in this picture, but the other end of the substation over there is where back over, and there's another structure, and that has 115,000 volts, which comes from Snoqualmie Falls. And Snoqualmie Falls is kind of interesting because originally the Milwaukee Railroad was going to build the electrified system to generate electricity there at Snoqualmie Falls, but they were financially unable to put it together, so the city of Seattle did it, and they entered into a lucrative rate with the Milwaukee Railroad to use that power to run trains.
Okay. Now explain to me what...
Well, now you're looking at the DC side.
Okay, so it comes in as AC,
you
goes
have-
out as DC, okay?
You have two different circuits up there now. You got a 4,400 volt circuit, which is a lower circuit, not over there. Yeah, just stay right up there.
Okay.
On that rack, and so two of those, probably the outboard ones, are for the signal circuit, which is 4,400, and that fed the signals, and you could get burned pretty good on that. We had a lineman one time get hit. Unfortunately, he got hit on the right hand, and it went down the right side of his body and blew a hole in his toe, so he didn't die. But the other three, the larger ones there, are the DC circuits. So that's up to 3,400 volts DC and 3,400 amps. And that can make your hair stand up.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of those hair-raising experiences inside the substation.
So, and the reason it's set up like that is because down in, which you might see later on, in the office here, you had 3 levers where you could control electricity to the west towards Maple Valley, or towards Hyack, or you could tie the two together to have a run-through circuit, so to speak.
Okay, so let's look at this. So this one might go to the west, and this one might go to the east, and then when you connected these, the whole thing would flow as one continuous circuit then, right?
So that's correct.
Okay, all right. So now we're inside the substation. Now, okay, so what's this thing?
That's a picture out of Frankenstein. So what you have there, that's a lightning arrestor. So if lightning came into the substation, it could be, if the load was greater, say, than the 115,000 volts that would be normal, it would spin off that extra voltage onto these stacks of insulators and ground connections, and it would eventually wear the power out of the lightning by the time it got to the bottom, hopefully.
Because what happened in Montana, didn't it not work one time in Montana?
Oh, well, in Montana, it did get into the substation. It blew up the transformer. So that transformer is transforming the 115,000 volts to the 4,300 volts or something like that.
Okay, so speaking of transformers, is that what we've got going on here then, Frank?
Those cans there are oil circuit breakers, and that's the transformer right there.
This is the transformer.
And that's a temperature gauge on the transformer right there.
Here. Okay.
And so that.
Just give him the stick, folks, and he can just show us. You point.
So these are standoff bushings here, and inside here is like I'd see on an excavator or a backhoe, where it has a toe and a foot, where it comes together, where it can pick up the dirt like this. So the electricity was connected like that, and these cans were filled with what's called transformer oil, and every so often, yearly, or it kind of depended probably on operations, you had to drain the oil out of here and filter it, run it through press filters, and to get any carbon out of the oil, because if it got too much carbon in it, then it could go to ground, it could blow a hole right through the can.
So it would conduct electricity, in other words.
That had to be really done correctly. And when you got through filtering the oil, if you thought it was good enough, then you put some of that oil into like a really fancy coffee cup. Only this coffee cup had 2 pins that went through it. And then you could put that plug that into a wall socket and see if you could draw an arc through that oil. If you could draw an arc through that oil, it wasn't filtered well enough and you had to filter it some more. If you got no arc in it, then you could put the oil back in the tank and re-energize it.
So then, what are these up here then, Frank?
Well, that's that's up on the ceiling there. The ones up in the ceiling, yeah.
These ones here?
So that's bringing 115,000 volts in, and that is going into the transformer, and then it's coming out of the transformer and going to this outside lead of this switch, and then when you inside the substation, which we'll show later, if you turn on the starting switch, it closes the contact here, and it then starts the AC motor that turns the two 1500 amp generators.
So what do we got here, Frank?
Oh, well, there's your transformer. Again, there's the nitrogen tanks there. Those tanks there were to eliminate any oxygen that might be in that transformer, because you needed oxygen to create a fire or an explosion. So by keeping the oxygen out of the transformer was very important. And so then I don't know exactly how that arrangement there is. I think that might be in a Cleon. I don't know exactly what that. But down underneath here, this thing here, this right over there, that goes down into like a basement, and down underneath there is.
Underneath here is a basement.
There are two. In this case, since there was this was a 2 MG set substation. If it had been 3 MG sets, then you'd have three of those spaces. And down below there were, I think they were like 500-gallon holding tanks that when you drained the oil out of the transformer, you drained it down into that holding tank, and that's what you pumped out through this press filter and round and round and round. So when you had to work inside there, which
tell
was
me
pretty
more.
interesting. So you'd turn off the power, you'd disconnect, you'd open up the circuit breakers, disconnects, and then you open the manhole, say the day before, and so that it could cool down. And then you drain the oil out. Well, you had to drain the oil out. And then you climbed in there, and you put a ladder up there, and you had to secure the ladder, and then we had to use a garden hose and an extension cord. So we had the extension cord, of course, for power so we could see, and the garden hose was so you could breathe through it. Wow. You'd want to take a couple whiffs through the garden hose. Elle and I would love that today.
Oh, yeah, this is all pre-OSHA, folks.
So it was still quite warm, and the chief maintenance guy was a pretty thin fellow. He was only about 5'4" or so. Joe Yankapal was his name. So he'd go up the ladder and he'd just go down like a monkey, And then we had another guy that stayed outside to give us insulating tape. The reason for going in there was that the bands around the metal plates in there would get loose and they would vibrate. If you went by, you may still go by some electrical device that you might hear something vibrating, and that's what that is. So in order to keep from getting an arc in there, that we had to go in there and tape those plates together. And it was really, really important. So I go down in there, and I'm working down there, and I can't deal with it. I mean, I'm getting claustrophobia, and I got to get my butt out of there before somebody has to try to pull me out. So I can't get my shoulders out. Then eventually I did get out, and the guy that was working down here, he went in, and I took care of him with the rags and whatnot too. But it was pretty interesting. And then once the oil was purified, then it was pumped back in there. And then you had to open the nitrogen to force the oxygen out, and then seal the lid on the top, and turn the power on, and hopefully all okay.
Yeah, everything went okay.
Since
how long
I
do you have to do that maintenance? How many? Like every few months, once a year? When did you have to do this kind of maintenance?
How often did you have to someone have to climb in there?
Well, like I say, I started in '69 and I left there in '74. So we didn't have, I'd say '72, I had the most operation, maybe 3 trains in a week. And so it wasn't like it was when when the bipolars were going to high-ac, you know, it wasn't like we had maybe 3 electric trains going at the same time. So you didn't have the usage in the time that I was there. So I was only involved in doing that, I would say, about 3 times. When I started out as an electrician's helper, and I worked at almost every one of the substations for a couple of months before I became an operator. But oh gosh.
So how does this thing work? This is like a Ouija board, isn't it? How do you use this to get a train up and down the hill from, let's say, Cedar Falls up to Hyack?
So this is all DC stuff. So this board right here with all of the small switches on it and the fuses, that's what powered the beanery and Alan's house and the rest of the houses up there. And the ones on the very end here, those 2 there, that was a 4,400 volts for the signals circuit.
These ones down here?
Yeah, right.
Okay, I got that right. Look, folks, I got it right.
And then this here, these 2 right here, the lower 2 were for starting or for closing the power from the MG sets out to the trolley.
The MG
And
sets
up
being
above,
motor generators.
You can't see what's up above, but those what looks like boards sticking out there, those were called arc chutes. So if you had an arc off of the connection, it would shoot them up to the ceiling, so it didn't come down and hit you. and by the way, that's a rubber mat down here, and under certain, you never wore a watch, and you never wore your wedding ring. It's the only time I ever took my wedding ring off.
Yeah.
But, so then you've got those dials there. No, those are gauge right here. No, those circle, little round things. But there you go. Yay. So those were to balance the power on regeneration. It was very, very important to keep, like if you had 1,000 amps of coming into the substation from regeneration, you had to make sure that each machine only got 500. If one of the machines got out of balance and maybe get 700, it would very quickly steal everything, and it could overload its circuit and trip it out of the system. And then all of a sudden you got everything on the other machine, and then you got track tripped out, now you got nothing. And so hopefully the train's got enough battery to run the air brakes. So you had like 15 or 20 seconds to get back online, and hopefully everything was okay. Sometimes when the train came out of the tunnel going west, they would kind of drift out of the tunnel, and then they'd go into regeneration. He'd bunch up his train, so all the couplings were real nice and tight. And then he might, the hoghead was the engineer. The engineer might feel that he wanted to speed up a little bit, so he'd take power. And so he's taking power from you. Then all of a sudden he realizes maybe that he's going maybe a little bit too fast because of like you saw that long bridge there, or Rockdale, or some of these places where we have a lot of slides. And so he might choke it up. So the electricity can kind of look like this that he's using, and that's all up in those meters there. These? The bigger ones. These? Yeah. And that's all inked. That's all stored in an ink graph, which comes very important later on. Anyway, ideally, when you had to get back online, if you got an overload circuit, he was in a kind of a move ahead or a non-use mode, so that you could get started and then bring the power up to him or pull the power down to him. It was like a yo-yo, so to speak. In any case, the system worked good. This graph thing, you'll hear more about that later on, because I don't know if that's something you want to get into right
Yeah,
now.
well, we could talk about it for a second. Yeah, we didn't actually find a copy of the graph for today's presentation, but why not just talk about it right now, Frank? Keep going.
There were times, mostly on eastbound trains coming out of Cedar Falls, they would maybe get a running start from his office, and they would probably start out pulling about 2,000 amps, and then get past the substation, going up to Ragnar. They would be pulling, they could even pull 3,000. But when he was coming out of the hole, which we called it, to go up the hill, to get a run at going up the hill, well, I would contact the operator at Hyack and have him come on at 3,400. So his line loss, the 20 miles or 30 miles of wire coming down, he'd have line loss in there, so he'd really only be providing the train maybe 3,200 volts. And I would be at 3,200. I did not dare go over 3,200 for when he wanted to accelerate, because he would just overload me and trip me out, and he'd be dead in the water, and impossible to get started again. He'd have to coast all the way back down and into his office and get maybe reduce the tonnage. So the deal was, the first thing the conductor would say, hey, the operator wasn't providing us enough power to make the hill. So I said, wait a minute. So then I get this graph out there and I send it in the office and I say, here's the graph. So the problem is the conductor didn't know how to add the tonnage that he picked up at Cedar Falls. So it was instead of being 3,000 ton, he was like 3,600 ton. And that made a huge difference in these box cabs. So that gave you a little rundown pretty quick.
So then, Frank, this is handling 115,000 volts coming in and 3,000 volts DC going out. And wasn't the back of this panel open?
The back of the panel is all DC.
Okay.
There's no AC back there. It's all DC, and it's all open. And
You don't want to get too close, do you?
we had a couple guys get fried back there in Montana, and all there was, a safety line was a yellow rope with a little sign on it, a little lightning sign on it.
High voltage.
So you had to be, you didn't crawl on your hands and knees back there.
So explain to us what this is, and let's start with this end, and we've got kind of two halves of the same picture here, but you know, back in the day with fixed focal length lenses, you needed two pictures to capture the whole scene. So starting over here, what's this?
Well, this is General Electric, GE, and the reason I say that is because some of them were Westinghouse. And so in the center one there with the holes around it, that's the AC motor. And each one on the end is DC generator, 1,500 amp DC generator on each end. Actually, we bumped them up to 1,600 amps by shimming the coils. And so those are bearing blocks in the center there, and those little vertical things that you see right in the center, that's oil. No, keep going with your stick. Right up, straight up, not too fast. Right there. That's a glass thing that shows you the bearing oil level. And those are lead Babbitt bearings. Heat was a big thing. You should see at the temperature gauge there. No, that's on the switchboard, right on the machine, on the AC motor there. Someplace there might be a. So I kept one of those things that's in my basement.
Oh, okay. So then what's the difference between this end and this end?
Well, let's go back over here to the square one because that's pretty important.
All right.
So
what do we
I'm
got?
sure all of you folks know what circuit breakers are in your house, and you have 15 amp circuit breakers for your light switches and 20 amp circuit breakers for your plug-ins, and you might have a 30 amp or even a 50 amp circuit breaker for your washer, for your dryer, and your stove. Well, that's that's a 3,500 amp circuit breaker. And the reason that's built like that is the circuit breaker is in the lower box. And that portion up above, that square, what looks like a piece of plywood up above is masonite. And that's called an arc chute. So if the train wrecked, or if the power line came down and went to ground, and it short-circuited that 3,400 volt or 3,400 amp service that you were given to that train, it would trip that breaker like the breaker in your house. You would see a spark in the breaker in your house, like if you pulled a plug out, if you were running a skill saw, instead of turning the switch off, you pulled the plug out of the wall, you're gonna draw an arc. So the arc that comes out of there can go 2 stories high in that building. And if a train, let's say the weather was really, really bad, so maybe trees were blowing into the wires once in a while, it could shut off the power at your house, you know? And so if you got right back online again and all of a sudden you went back out again, that circuit breaker could electronically controlled could only function about twice without overheating the little control button. So you had to try to energize it by hand. And you want to find a way to wet your pants or crap your pants, that's how you do it. So right down in the bottom here, way down, keep going, see that little thing sticking out the side at the bottom? No, right there. Okay. So right there is a hole about a little bit larger than a baseball bat, but not much big larger. And the reason was because you had to take a baseball bat and stick it in there and try to close that circuit. And you had to keep your head below that. So you kneeled down there, or you laid down there. And that spring was about that tall, and it's like a spring in a railroad car. Only instead of being a round coil, it was a square coil. And I discovered when I took it apart that it was pretty high in gold, pretty high value gold. But you had to lay down there and try to close that. And if it was still going to ground, it was and you didn't make it. You had to go to the head to change your pants. But it was a pretty tricky deal, but it really, I only had to do it once. I practiced doing it without any electricity going. I practiced how I could get in a good position to close that thing. It was pretty interesting, but I took that one apart. I wanted to see how, when we shut down, and I stayed on for about 6 months dismantling some of the stuff. And that was the first thing I dismantled because I wanted to see how the hell that thing was built.
So here we have another picture of a motor generator unit, and is that a Westinghouse? It might be, I'm not sure. And then what is the thing here on the far right, Frank?
Well, let's see, you had, yeah, that's,
because you painted it with that special paint, right?
I know what that is, I just can't call it up. When you're 84, you can figure that out. I'm sure some of you guys might be that age, I don't know. Stator, that's the stator. So and the other end is something similar, but maybe a little bit different side, and that's the exciter. And that is to help boost electricity from the commutator, which is the big end by the cage there.
And here we have a substation operator. Now, is this where your desk was, Frank?
Yeah, that's the substation. All right, so there's the number, that was the number 4 phone. That was a city phone. And then down on the side here, you had a phone and a crank. So like Cedar Falls was 2 shorts and a long or some damn thing. I can't even remember, it's hard to say. So with that, I would maybe rattle Alan's cage down at the depot to find out if he could tell me when the train might be getting ready to head out of there. And then I had another phone that was just used by the substation operators. It was a number 4 phone. And then in front of this guy was a phone, a microphone that would come out like this, and that was the train dispatcher, and Alan knows all about that stuff.
Yeah,
I
that
seldom-
was a scissors. We
I
called it a
seldom
scissors phone.
communicated with the dispatcher, but really quickly, you'll see those white posts, 1, 2, and you can't hardly, the third one was over here. Those were the posts that controlled the switches up on the very first picture that he showed you, the DC connections, so that if you had a train between Cedar Falls and Hyack and it was going uphill, he was going to demand a lot of power. And if you had another train that was just going down to Tacoma, they didn't need much. So I would start Renton by remote control, and I would disconnect. I would open this circuit so he couldn't take any power from me so that I could run the train up the hill. And then when that was all done, then I would open those 2 circuits and close this one in the middle, and that connected everybody together. So that's how we could run 2 or 3 trains at one time without overloading the system.
So here's another picture of the substation. This is getting kind of towards the end of its career, isn't it?
Yeah, but the important thing that you have here, way over in the corner, that's that guy right there. That's 115,000 volts coming from Snoqualmie Falls, and that is a rack up there that has 6 bushings on it. Bushings are well, you could call it insulators. They're standing up like this, and you can see they're spread apart, and they're down. You would barely see a silver pole going down the side of that telephone pole, and down at the bottom there's a 90-degree crank, much like a switch on a railroad switch. And so when you wanted to, if you had to work on, if the crews had to work on the wires, or if there was a short circuit from that end, then you had to open up that power up there. And what you did first, you had to open up an oil circuit breaker, which was those silver cans in the very first picture. You'd opened up what's called the west side, and that would be the west side. And once you disconnected that, opened the oil circuit breaker, because you could break that power inside those cans with that transformer oil, it snuffed out the power, snuffed out the arc. But if you try to open that thing up without opening that oil circuit breaker, the arc would be all the way, it would burn the whole top off of those. So you can see that's pretty flimsy. And the wind would come out of the southwest in the wintertime and would wiggle that rack around. And then when you had to operate that switch, opening it wasn't quite a bad, you might draw an arc about, maybe a foot. It was no big deal. And then you got the switch open like so. So it's a big blade thing like this that's going up and like this. And then on top of the insulator there's a V thing like this. And the trick is to get this V, this piece of metal, to go in to make the connection. So you stood down at the bottom, and then you try to close it. And sometimes the blade would go on the outside of the V, and then you had to reopen it, and then you draw an arc in again when you reopen it. And so you had to get a hold of this thing and just go whack, and hopefully it went in the center. And so once it made in the center, then you were all connected, and then you could close this oil circuit breaker, and you had power back into the substation and back down to the beanery and up to Hyack and all the way to Othello.
Excellent.
But that was really important stuff.
So here are a couple of pictures of the beanery, and this was sort of a famous place. These pictures are by a very famous photographer, Blair Koistra, who graciously allowed us to use these images in today's presentation. And we also have, here's another picture of Blair, and Alan, isn't this Rattlesnake Lake here in the background?
Yep, and that's Rattlesnake Ridge up there.
Rattlesnake Ridge up there too. And we'll talk about Rattlesnake Lake and how it came to be in the second half of our program. Very famous photograph by Richard Steinheimer of the beanery with the deer, and then Blair got a picture with the train going up the Everett branch towards Everett.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
So the deer that you just saw, so I had 3 children, and a son and 2 daughters. And my eldest daughter was just a real animal lover. She loved rabbits and maybe even snakes, I don't know. But I have some photographs of her coming down, bringing me breakfast down to the substation with her arm around a fawn like this, walking down to the substation. It's just really fabulous.
Here's a picture. These are inside of the beanery. These are taken by Richard Steinheimer. Pictures inside. Would this be the dining room, and then this would be one of the hotel rooms, Alan, do you think? Or?
Yeah, I think so. The reason for this building is to house the train crews and to feed them, especially in the winter when they had the rotary snow trains out of Cedar Falls. They had to go up and plow snow over the pass. But you had various work trains and locals out of here, and so they had this bunkhouse basically as a trainman's hotel, and then a beanery in there to feed the crews before they went on duty, and also when they come off duty.
Yeah, so we got a couple of pictures of it here. Here's, is that Tom Stosser?
No, I think that's a cook.
That's a
worked in
cook?
the-
Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Spoiler alert, I got a caption wrong. Oh, because I thought it was Tom Strasser. You could see him with the locals, and then you could see him with the locals. And I believe the picture on the right actually made it into the Seattle Times at one point. Very famous picture by Richard Steinheimer. These were in his book, and we were able to help from the Center for Railroad Photography and Art in Madison, Wisconsin, to be able to use these images in today's program. And then this is what it looked like in later years. Now, which one of you guys as kids used to play house in here?
That was mine. My 2 daughters would go down here and play house in this. It was all abandoned. My oldest daughter had names for all the rooms. This is John's room. He's kind of messy, and this is Bill's room. But they'd go down here and play house all the time and stuff in this building. And there was a lot of, as you can see, a lot of dishes and things left behind, so they utilized that stuff. Had fun down there playing. When they finally tore this building down, we found out it was housing about 1,000 bats up in the attic, and about 500 of them moved into my house, and about 500 moved into my neighbor's house.
Yeah, well.
So I'll give you a little bit of my story there. So Virginia Golf, a lady named Virginia Golf, and
Still living, by the way.
for the life of me, I can't think of her husband's name right now, but they ran the beanery until I left there, or probably just before. Yeah, until I left there, because they went to Alaska just before I left. But my wife used to come down and help Virginia feed, especially the crew that was going on the Everett run, or if we had sometimes if you had a train that couldn't make it up the hill and they had to back down, they couldn't finish the job in their hours of service, so they would spend the night there, and Nancy would help Virginia fix meal, breakfast, and so forth, and Bagley Junction, or the crew that went to Bagley Junction, or went to came down Maple Valley. No, they didn't come to Maple Valley. Where the hell did they go? That
Enumclaw.
Enumclaw.
from Cedar Falls to.
That was the Enumclaw job. They'd come up to Bagley Junction and then come up to Cedar.
Well, it never used to be a Cedar Falls job, though. Oh, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. They'd come up and they'd go to Bagley Junction, and then they'd spend the night sometimes. Anyway, we used to play pinochle, and they'd go fishing. Fishing there on the lake was great because it wasn't open to the public at that time. And you know how they packed the fish home? They took the pillowcases off and filled them with fish.
Oh my, very good.
Yeah, I'm sorry to see the mess there.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, that's a shame. Here's a Blair Coister picture that kind of gives us, sets the scene for us, as it were, because we could see a westbound train, this is in the diesel era now, with the substation still standing, the beanery, and then this was the line that went up to the Everett branch. So that gives us just kind of an idea of what we've got there. And then here's a couple of Blair Coister photos that, again, show the bungalows, which, were quite famous. Alan, the bungalows were for substation crews or for train crews, or who were those bungalows for?
Well, they were originally built for the substation. The substation ran 24/7, so
Yeah.
you had 3 shifts of operators working at the substation, and so one house for each one of those guys and his family. And so that was the original use of them, but by my time, the substation had been closed and they just rented them out to any employee. So the section man lived in the closest one and I lived in the second one. Another operator rented the third one, but he never lived up there. He worked clear up in Bellingham, but he kept the house in case they put another job on at Cedar. He'd come back down there and work again. And then there was several other houses, because at one time the roadmaster had a house here, the agent had a house here, the telegraph operators, the roadmaster's clerk, the section foreman, the signal maintainer, and the linemen all had houses here in this community.
Yeah, it was quite a community at one time.
It was, we had a pretty nice community, really, once again in '69, every substation only had one operator, and then they would juggle your schedule around. I mean, one week you might work 8 to 4, and another week you might work midnight to 8, or you just didn't. You worked. We worked like. We had like 14-day weeks, 14 or 13-day weeks. Yeah, you work 13 days and you got two days off. And every third month you got a 4-day weekend or something like that. But many times we were on 24-hour. If you got a call, you get like the train dispatcher would let a whole tell the electrical head office there in Tacoma, say, hey, we need power down at the roundhouse at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then the superintendent of electrical would contact the substation operator and say, hey, Frank, you got to be on duty at 3 o'clock in the morning and provide power. So, but we had great, really great family connections. The wives really pooled together, getting the kids down to school. I have to say, I'd been in business for myself for several years prior to this, and I got out of high school in '57, and I went into business right away because I couldn't afford to go to college, and then it was a 24-hour, 8-day-a-week thing too. So going to the substation was nothing new for me for time-wise, but. The camaraderie between the communications guys and the signal maintainers and the car knockers, which car knocker is a guy that repairs cars, and he lived in the farthest house, and I was in the house that Alan eventually came in, and then a relief agent was in the first house, but it was nice.
Let's take a look at this picture and tell us what we have here. Why does it say Moncton instead of Cedar Falls?
Well, this is what became Cedar Falls, but when the railroad built through here, they named this station Moncton for reasons unknown. There is a Moncton up in New Brunswick, Canada, I believe, so maybe there was a Canadian on the survey crew, who knows. But this was the original depot in the center of the building there. And then you have your semaphore train order signal. Those blades would notify trains if they had to stop there to pick up further orders. And then you got the water tank there. Now, this water tank didn't have a spout on it. This water tank fed a couple of water columns that stood along the tracks, and they get the water that way. This was a helper point at this point in the railroad's existence. This was the beginning of the mountain grade up Snoqualmie Pass, so you had trains would stop here and get a helper locomotive put on them. So you had to have facilities to run those engines. So what you have here on the far is the coaling tower that held coal in there for the engines, and then water from the water tank.
So
And then you can see there's a outhouse there, a men and women's double outhouse for the employees. This little board and batten building over here, that was the express shed. You can see the Wells Fargo diamond sign there on the corner of it. And then you can see all the telegraphers are all out there hamming it up on the baggage cart.
So what are the keys to help us identify what year this picture was taken, and what year was this picture taken?
This picture was taken about 1910, I believe. And the station was changed to Cedar Falls in 1912, so we know it's prior to that. And but otherwise, this scene pretty much stayed the same from 1909 when this depot was opened up until they built the new depot in 1911.
So whose idea was it to change it from Moncton to Cedar Falls?
Actually, it was the city of Seattle was already established up here, and they had called their power plant up here the Cedar Falls plant because it was on the Cedar River, and there was a waterfalls just up from it. And so they wanted the railroad to change the name to Cedar Falls, and the railroad did not like, they had a criteria for station names, and they didn't like two-word names, they liked the single-word names. And then they didn't like names that could be confused with other nearby stations. And down on the Pacific Coast Railroad out of Maple Valley here was a station called Cedar Mountain. So there was a potential to mistake those two stations when you're shipping freight and stuff like that. And so they didn't want to change it. They kind of resisted the city of Seattle to do that, but the city of Seattle turned around and made them an offer that they couldn't refuse. And that offer was that they would supply electricity to the depot and the little railroad community that was here. And then they also would provide new signs for the depot that had the word Cedar Falls spelled out in light bulbs.
You mean like this?
Like that, exactly, pretty close to that, yeah.
Yeah, now we think, what year would this be about then?
This would be about 1912.
Okay.
Or 13, somewhere in that area. Well, maybe a little later, because this one has the modified sign. See, it says plant number 1, the municipal light and power system of Seattle, America's best lighted city, 40 miles. I have a 1912 picture that shows that sign in a simpler form. So at some point, I'm guessing that because this is plant number 1, maybe the Ross Dam or something was plant number 2. So maybe this sign was modified after that was put in. I don't know. But.
So quickly then, explain how these train order signals worked and how I knew which one was for me.
Okay, the blade that would govern the train is the one that's on the right as you're approaching it. So that would be that one. And the color of that blade would be red with a white stripe on it. The other blade is white with a black stripe, and that applies to westbound trains. And those levers that control those blades were controlled from floor levers inside the depot, almost like an interlocking plant. You'd grab the lever and you'd throw it one way or the other. And those blades at this time only had 2 positions. This is stop for orders, and then if the blade was straight up, that was clear. There was a 45-degree angle that they put in later when they went to the 19 form train orders that could be hooped up as the train went by, and they wouldn't have to stop.
So here's some pictures of it a little bit later. This would be about in your era, wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
Is that your truck? I always got to ask.
Yeah, that top one there is a little before my time because it's still got the semaphore style train order signal. And that happened to break one day. One of the operators went to throw it. In fact, I think it was Marty Kester. And he would just squeeze the lever and let gravity do the rest, and he just let it go. And that semaphore would slam down. Well, he did it one too many times, and it shattered. And it come crashing down off the thing, and they sent for Andy Brettschneider. He was the signal maintainer, and he went in and looked at it, and he got a hold of his supervisor and says, I can't fix this, it's beyond repair, you're gonna have to get a new signal. So they bought a color light signal, which is almost like a traffic light signal. It has 3 lenses for green, yellow, and red.
So we can kind of tell the different years then because of how this train order signal evolved over time.
Yeah, I believe that signal broke in 71. So
Okay.
that would be prior to 71, this would be after 71.
And we had a famous movie in Cedar Falls. Tell us a little bit about this, Alan.
Yeah, just about the time I was moving out of my house up there, they showed up and they gave the depot a new coat of paint on the front of it and hung this Victor, Wyoming sign on there and fixed it all up. In fact, you can see that the interior is all completed. They never did any interior shots that made it into the movie, but I went up there and was looking through the window, and there was a teletype in there that was better than the one that we had when the railroad was running, and that teletype was operating. It was spitting out all kinds of stuff. So they went to great lengths to create a railroad office in there that never really got seen in the movie. But anyway, John Belushi and I can't.
Blair Brown, it looks
Blair
like.
Brown,
Yeah,
yeah.
this was a Hollywood classic if there ever was one, right?
And yeah, and anyway, they filmed this movie up there, and we went out and asked these guys when they were fixing the depot all up, and they even brought a load of ballast up there and laid it out along the main line to make the main line look nicer. And we asked them, what are you guys doing? Well, we're just a group that goes around and fixes stuff. And
Yeah, right.
Okay. Where were you when the railroad was running? And of course, the rails were all rusty by that point in time. So they took a 3-inch roller and some silver paint, and they painted the tops of the rails. But they messed up because where the switches were, they also painted the guardrails silver and stuff, which should have been left rusted. And then the car department building over there, they painted a big beech nut tobacco sign on the end of it, and that got left behind. And I always wondered about people driving up and visiting Cedar Falls in later years after the railroad was gone and wandered into where the yard was, and they'd see that, oh my, look at that old beech nut tobacco sign, that must be decades old.
So, but this is inside the city of Seattle watershed, isn't it, Alan?
Yeah.
So not many people can go in there, and didn't you have a problem with the city of Seattle when you were at work once?
Well, I wasn't really at work. It was on my day off on a Sunday, and I was down at the far end of the yard, the west end of the yard. I discovered that the main line had date nails still in its ties that were dated clear back to 1927. So I went down there to get some date nails out of those ties. So I was down there prying date nails out, and one of the watershed Nazis spotted me and come up there and says, what are you doing? I says, harvesting date nails. And he says, well, you can't be in here. And I says, yeah, I can. No, you can't be on this property. And I said, well, I work for the railroad. I come down here every night and check the yard. Well, you're within the confines of the Seattle watershed. I says, no, I'm on the railroad tracks. The railroad owns all this. you can't be down here. The only time you can be down here is during your duty, when you're doing your duty and stuff. And so he ran me off and threatened to get a King County Sheriff up there to arrest me if I didn't leave. So I left, but after that, when I'd have to go down there and check the yard in the middle of the night, just for him, at whatever point I was closest to the Cedar River, I would unzip my fly and take a piss.
I had my run-ins with those fellas too, but
What happened?
Most of it was my fault because I tried to sneak up to Chester Morris Lake because there's always such great fishing up there. And especially when every once in a while the University of Washington fisheries people would come with a helicopter and they'd go up to that lake up there for two reasons. One about, of course, the fish, but they had always tried to find out where the fault was that caused the water to seep down into Cedar Falls to create Rattlesnake Lake.
Oh, okay. We'll get more on that in a minute.
So
I think.
I got taken out of there on a van a couple of times.
So, Alan, tell us a little bit about these pictures. Now, this was your desk where you worked, isn't it?
Yeah, this was the desk, and that's the scissors phone there. That was the dispatcher's phone, and you could also plug into another hole, and that would become the block phone. And that was a concentrator box there that he's pointing to, and you had a plug that you could push into any number of holes there. One hole was even to activate the telegraph. We still had a working telegraph in there. And then the red phone there was a city phone, and when that got put in, Jimmy Irvin, the agent up there, called it the hotline because it was red, and so that was kind of a running joke up there. But then you got the temperature gauge outside there. Part of our duties was at certain hours you had to give the train dispatcher the weather, and he'd have to write it on his train sheet. And then those lights up there, you can see the red one is lit up and the green one. We called those the colors, and those lights would come on either side when a train was approaching. About 5 minutes before the train would arrive, one of those lights would come on like that red one has there. When that light come on, you would grab the dispatcher's phone and step on the pedal, and you'd say, in the colors at Cedar Falls, and then the dispatcher would let you know if he wanted you to copy a train order for him. He'd say 19 West, copy 3, and you'd grab your train order pads out of the shelves there and copy an order and hoop it up to them as they went by. Or he'd just say nothing for them, and then you just wait until they finally went through, and then you'd write down the engine number and the time they went by, and then you'd give the dispatcher what we call the OS. And the OS stood for on sheet, and you had a sheet of paper that you had this written down on, and you'd read it back to the dispatcher at the engine number and the direction and the time that it went by your station. And then that helped him to keep track of his trains and figure meets ahead of time based on what the progress that these trains were making.
Now I've got a question for you, Alan. Just at the edge of this picture.
Yeah, that's my work. That
Alan,
box is actually the train order signal. You can just see one half of it there that has a button that you could turn 3 different ways, green, yellow, or red, and that would change the signal outside to let the train know if he's going to have to stop for orders or get orders on the fly or not get orders at all. And then there was another similar one on the other side of the box. But when Cedar Falls was no longer a 24-hour station. You had a weird thing like the agent was there from 8 to 4. Then you had a night operator that came on at 8 p.m. at night and stayed till 4 in the morning. And so you had 2 4-hour gaps that the station was closed. And the Milwaukee had a weird rule that when the station was closed, you were supposed to turn the train order signal light off. Now, in the rule books, the absence of a signal where one usually is a danger signal and you're supposed to stop. So the train order signal being light burned out would be a reason to stop and ask the dispatcher what's going on. But anyway, I guess to save power or something, the Milwaukee had this rule where you had to turn the train order signal off when you leave. Well, then you had to remember to turn the dang thing back on when you come on duty. And so I made a little cartoon there that I stuck on there, and it said, shut it off, turn it on, or something like that. And it was a reminder that when you'd come in there, oh yeah, I better check the signal, because it was real embarrassing when your first train showed up and hollered on the radio that your train order signal wasn't lit up.
Yeah, Alan has a secret life as a cartoonist, folks, but we'll get into that at a different time. So let's talk about the picture on the right. Who is that? What's going on?
That's the second trick or relief operator up there, and his name was Jerry Brettschneider. And he lives in Iowa right now. After the railroad folded up, he ended up as a dispatcher for Burlington Northern and retired out of Fort Worth, and then moved up to Iowa. But he was a bit older than me in seniority, about 2 years, I think. But he grew up in Cedar Falls because his father was the signal maintainer, Andy Brettschneider.
Who are these guys?
Okay, the guy in the doorway is Jerry Shively, and he was the section foreman. When I first met him, he was the section foreman on the Everett line out of Carnation, but he eventually ended up as the section foreman here at Cedar Falls, and he's still living. He lives over above Spokane somewhere. And then this guy Al Pisano, was my neighbor. He lived in the other substation house, the one closest to the substation. And so his family and my family were the last two railroad families to live up there. And then he bought a house in North Bend, so by attrition, I won. I got to be the last railroad family in Cedar Falls.
And we don't know
the
who
guy on the bench, I don't know who.
Yeah,
he
we
is.
can't really tell who he is. It's just.
He's probably in the witness protection program or something.
And here we are inside your station, and we could see a better view of your turn it off, turn it on train order signal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's Jerry Brettschneider sitting in the chair, and this is Andy Brettschneider, his dad, that was the signal maintainer. And then this is Jimmy Urban, the agent. And Jimmy's still living up in North Bend, about 90 years old, I think.
Yeah, what era do you think this picture would be?
This picture, well, it's a Blair Kuster picture, so
Right.
it's probably taken around the, 76, 77 era, I guess. Look, you see the clock above Jim's head there. See the little black square off to the left of it? Right there, yeah. That was a little telegraph key. And at a certain time of the day, they would send a pulse, a 1 second pulse, boom, click, click, and the telegraph over there on the desk would click like that. And when it got to a certain point, it would pause, and then it would click, and you go up there and push that key down, and the clock would go straight up to 12 noon. And so that's how you'd set your standard time.
Oh.
And that clicking came from the Naval Observatory clear in Washington, D.C. or someplace. They channeled all the way through.
Well, knowing what time it is always an important thing in the railroad business.
Yeah, and so that was a standard clock, so it had to be accurate. So that was your way of making sure every day it was accurate. And then this beast right in front of Jerry here, that's the teletype machine. And then you can see the tapes hanging off the wall there on the, see those long tapes? Yeah, right there, yeah. Those tapes, when you type it out, the machine punches holes in the tape, and the tape then, when you feed it through the machine, it deciphers those holes and types out your train lists or messages or whatever you want to send on there. And we had to retain those tapes for, I think, like a week or something before we could throw them away in case they needed to have a list rerun or something. But
Here's a Blair Koister picture of a westbound freight approaching Cedar Falls with the Bicentennial, Milwaukee Road's Bicentennial unit in the picture. The crew's doing their job, inspecting the train.
yeah, and see, I would say this was probably around 1977 or 78 because the Bicentennial engine is no longer on the point. It's not the shining pride of the fleet anymore.
Which would have been 1974, the U.S. Bicentennial. So
76.
76. Hey, let's get our facts straight. Yeah.
1974? 1974?
1976.
76 was the
We
bicentennial.
had the bicentennial. I think they painted that engine up about 74 and ran it for about 2 years before the,
So you'll notice the number of DC local or diesel locomotives on there. I think there's 4 or 5 on there. So in the 70s, the Milwaukee was looking at upgrading the electrification, but General Electric wanted the Milwaukee to change over the whole system, electrification from DC to AC. And so the General Electric was reluctant to be involved in providing parts, building parts to keep the DC system running. And the other thing was that General Electric was moving forward with diesel electric locomotives, and they had what were called Jeeps. And so they started putting these Jeeps out on the train. They were like 2,000 horsepower, I think, and they're two drivers, traction motors. And they'd come out of Tacoma, and they were rated for, I think they were rated for like 500 tons per unit. And so if they had 2,000 tons, then you would figure they'd put 4 units on it. But they were less than 50% reliable, so they had to put 6 units on there to be able to make it. And it always galled me because we could have done it with the E39 with a lot less
Less
power.
drama.
But
Yeah.
it was a big deal there. I went through a lot of meetings and conversations about that.
So in this picture, the 161 is on the Everett branch, is that right?
yeah, and they used to use what we call number 7 track or the back passing. They used to use that a lot for meets. I don't know if the siding was getting so bad that they didn't trust it anymore, but towards the end years there, they would come in that way and do a meet, and then they'll back out and use the rest of the siding to get back out onto the main again.
Here's some pictures of the depot in its later years. You can see it's getting boarded up now and getting ready to get moved. It actually lives on as a house in Maple Valley, as I recall, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
and the guy that owns that house is in the audience here today.
Well, there you go.
But that bottom one there, that's the way that most people remember the depot because that's the road into the watershed. So the most public saw the backside of the depot.
And here we can see some Cascade rail foundations. I think these might actually be Jeff Moreau's. We can see a picture of the yard looking west with the depot.
And you can see the water column there.
You can see the water column here. Yeah, we'll get a little bit closer look at it here. And what are all these buildings off to the right here, Alan?
Okay, well, that first one there, that's the scale house. That's where you weighed the cars. And then the other ones were, I believe, for the car department. We had a carman up there that did repair work on cars.
So I'm going to reach around and you point to me what the back pass is. Is this?
Yeah, that's the back passing.
Okay.
And it ultimately came out on the Everett branch, or started the Everett branch.
I liked this picture so much, not so much that I like this picture, but I like the picture that follows it. So tell us what's going on here.
Okay, this is the Olympian, and he is stopped here to pick up a helper. And so this is the helper getting tied onto the head end. And while they're putting the helper on, they're taking advantage to fill the road unit with water from the water column. You can see the roof of the depot behind the train there and the train order signal. And then that's the oil service tank. That steel tank on top of there had bunker C oil for the locomotive fuel.
We got a little better picture of that coming.
And then that track on the very edge of the photo, that was called the caboose track. And in this particular picture here, we have a portable building on a flat car that they're moving somewhere.
So did somebody leave their hat and grip behind here in this picture?
Well, it probably belongs to the photographer, I would guess, would be my guess. Way down there beyond the oil tank, you can see a lot of steam coming up, but that's also the coal bunkers. You see the roof of them, the coal towers, right there, yeah. The coal towers that used to be up here in that first picture we saw got moved down to between the legs of the Y in later years.
Yeah, it's a very iconic photo, and we can tell from the photo about what year this is. What era is this?
Well, it's between 1911 and 1912, because the depot was built in 1911, and it's listed as Olympian, CM, and PS Railway, which is Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound. And by the end of 1912, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound had been absorbed into the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul.
Okay, so it's interesting how Alan can use these little keys to be able to tell us so much historically about these pictures.
And I mentioned earlier that Cedar Falls was a helper point, which it still is, but now we have this huge yard here because they had built a branch line to Enumclaw off of the main line about 4 miles down below Cedar Falls. It was called Bagley Junction, and they built about an 18-mile branch line to Enumclaw from there. And then they built, in 1911, they built a 54-mile branch line down to Everett. And so now you had 2 branch lines feeding freight into this Cedar Falls area, so they had to construct this huge yard here to handle all that kind of stuff.
Here's that oil tank. Explain to us how this worked and what some of the environment was.
Actually, this oil facility was kind of a genius thing. It was built so that they only had to have 1 man operate it. And that's the boiler house there. It had a Scotch Marine boiler in it. And this big concrete sump here held 500,000 gallons of bunker sea oil. The bunker sea oil would come in these tank cars, and they would spot them there, and then they'd open the valves, and they had a chute for each car that ran down and emptied the oil into this sump. Then they could pump. They just had 1 man on duty that could take that boiler house and fire it up, and he could pump that tank up there completely full. And as long as that tank was full by the end of his shift, the trains could come in here, the engines, and they could get oil by gravity flow to a standpipe on the track over there. See the tank cars there? Yeah, one of those is the water column, and the other one is the oil column there. And so they just had to have a 1-shift guy to run that plant 24 hours a day. It was pretty ingenious setup. This is what remains of it today. Is this brick tower is still buried up there. You'd have to really search to find it now because the trees are.
Well, and you need the permission of the city of Seattle to even go back there, which Frank and I were able to do.
Well,
so.
You can take your chances and go in there. Yeah.
So then, didn't you have like an aquarium going on inside of this thing?
Yeah, this thing is also still there. The concrete sump, and the city of Seattle would like it to be gone. It's just, I think they lay awake nights worrying about it, but the roof rotted off of it or whatever, and it still had bunker sea oil in it, but it also filled up with rainwater, and so every spring it had frogs in it. And I'd be out here checking the yard at night, and this thing, you could hardly hear yourself think. The frogs were croaking in there so hard. And I don't know, frogs are kind of a gauge of being one of the most sensitive animals to changes. So I don't think that bunker oil in there is doing any harm to anything. I didn't see any 3-eyed frogs in there or anything. But yeah, the city, I've gone on a couple of their what they call railroad treasure tours, and they'll take you over and show you this thing, and then they'll talk about their woes on this thing and how they want to get rid of it somehow, and then they'll take you for a drive down the right-of-way for a few miles and back. And I thought, oh yeah, they call it the railroad treasure tour now that the railroad's gone, but when the railroad was here, they hated it. They did not like the railroad going through here at all.
Yeah, so just as a note, by the way, we had some time with both Alan and Frank where we did some recordings with them, and you can see those recordings on YouTube. And one of Frank's recordings is standing in front of this tower when we had permission from City of Seattle to be able to actually go back there and look at what it looks like. It doesn't look like what it used to look like anymore. It's just all trees and bushes at this point. So here we get into some of the different pictures. These are some of the Richard Steinheimer photos that we're so lucky to have. And we're putting helpers on here, or what are we doing? Any idea, Alan?
Yeah, you know, that'd be the helpers over there on the far track. And so they may be getting ready to cut the helpers in there. And this is right basically in front of the depot. That's the platform there.
Okay. And this one, of course, very famous photograph. Was this taken at the depot, do you think? You know, because you could stand underneath the awning of the depot and shoot a picture of a train in the rain without getting absolutely soaked.
Yeah, but they had a kind of a platform that extended across several tracks there, and I don't see that here, so I don't think that's right across from the depot.
Whoop. Frank, you got something to add here? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's something here that you probably, most people don't know anything about, but these locomotives here actually have tires. And one time at Cedar Falls, they had, on the way, maybe at Black River or maybe some other trip, they had spun the wheels on the track. And so they make flat spots on the track for one thing, but they also wear out the hard steel that's on the outside, and that is the tire. So in order to put a tire on that, they bring these propane torches up, and it burns in a ring about the size of the wheel, and they heat that tire up. And then they drive that.
Push it on there.
They're able to put that on or slide it on there, and they drive it on with a sledgehammer. I saw this done in the middle of the night, so it was very interesting and lots of sparks. but it's pretty interesting. And then that tire shrinks when it cools down, and it's so tight that it can operate like that.
Yeah. Question.
They pull the axle out from underneath the engine, or could they do that with the?
Yeah, they did that on these engines.
With the axle intact, I think. Yeah. These are some interesting photos. This is by a fellow named, a very famous fellow named Jeff Moreau, April 29, 1971. These pictures have never been shown before in public. So these are very interesting. And, you know, as interesting as the photos are, Jeff Moreau is just worth a quick story. So that's not his real name. It's an alias. And so why would a railroad photographer have an alias? And that's because his sister was a movie star. His sister was Stephanie Powers. If anybody ever saw the TV show Heart to Heart, the photographer on this occasion was his brother. Frank, go ahead.
This 4 units right here could take 4,000 tons up to Hayek, up the mountains, and it would pull almost 3,400 amps for almost the whole trip, and it could be the substation or the generator set when you started it up, like let's say in December. The substation might be 30 degrees. By the time we got this train up to Hayek, the substation would be about 90 degrees from the heat that was generated from the...
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And the other thing I tell you,
Yeah, well,
I ran the E39 mostly, E39 and E50.
They were the last sets.
Oh, gosh. Frank, you keep losing your train of thought.
We'll look at this picture by Moreau and it'll come
Anyway,
back to you.
it was interesting.
Yeah, well, it'll come back to us. So this would be a city lighthouse over here, Alan?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
And in that previous picture, you can see a little bit of the work equipment. See the snow flangers and Jordan spreader, and then that picture on the bottom there, you can see the water car right there, yeah. They had to maintain a water car up there to fight fires if the train started a fire in the watershed up there.
Classic Jeff Moreau image of this same train. We're going to watch this train go across the mountains here in a second. Go ahead, Frank.
This E50 locomotive was primarily run in the Rocky Mountains division, and it was still running and I ran for it a couple of times. It came over to the coast a couple of times for repairs at Tacoma, and I ran for it, and it was still running when the Milwaukee shut it down. And it came online in like 1913.
Something like that, yeah.
1920.
Yeah, they were impressive. I mean, it's
And that very locomotive is in the Transportation Museum in Duluth, Minnesota.
in Duluth, Minnesota, where it's going to remain for eternity because they can't get all the other stuff out of the way to pull it out. So
Now, an engineer friend of mine, he was running one of these box cabs coming down Snoqualmie Pass, and they hit a snow slide, and it broke the window out, and the snow came into the cab and pinned the fireman in his seat. And there was nothing they could do for him. He was still breathing, so they just made their run down to Cedar Falls, and when they got down there, then they could get some help, and they
dig him out.
dug him out. But he was trapped in his seat under the snow until they got down off the hill.
And here's another picture of that train. We'll kind of zip through some of these. This just kind of shows them, well, Frank's got a term for it. Frank, you call that bowl cooking, don't you? They're like switching in the yard, I think. And so putting their train together, it looks like. Here's some Blair Coister pictures. These are a little bit later now. This is an eastbound train. And then here's one going by. We could still see the beanery in the background and the Everett branch off here on the left. Another one of these great Blair Coister photos. These are Richard Steinheimer's. Now, Alan, how did he climb up? How did he get up there to take these pictures?
No, he went for a ride on the helper up to Hyack, and then on the way back down, he wanted to get some pictures, so they accommodated him and let him off, and then they backed up and posed for some pictures for him.
Aren't these something, folks? Would this be like, was this Garcia or?
Yeah, this is up close to Garcia. I think that's the Hull Creek Bridge.
Okay. Yeah, just fabulous stuff. Very grateful for CRPA letting us be able to share this with our audience today. And then now, that's kind of why do we have this big retaining wall here and this really cool bridge? Could you tell us a little bit about this, Alan?
Okay, well, this is McClellan's Butte, and the story goes that the contractor up here that was building the roadbed set a huge dynamite charge, like 25 kegs of black powder and a couple of tons of dynamite sticks, all drilled into this rock to blast it off to make a roadbed out of it. And they set it off with one shot, and the back of the photograph I have says that it shook Seattle and they thought it was an earthquake, but I don't know if that's true or not. But what is true is they used too much dynamite and they literally blew the entire side of the mountain off. So they had to rebuild a roadbed out of concrete. And so that's what you're seeing here is this retaining wall for a concrete roadbed, and then there's a 50-foot concrete arch in the middle of it. That probably most bicyclers and hikers that use this trail today probably don't even know that's there because there's no clue unless you walk down over the edge and see it. But to get that photo, there's a pole up there, one of the high transmission poles, and in order to put a guy on there, they put another pole across and then ran the guy down to it that way to stabilize it. So what I did, I walked out on that pole, and when I got the camera up to my eyes, I started to lose my balance. So I had to snap that picture really quick. I'm surprised it came out as clear as it did. But
That's a great shot.
So there's another
Frank.
thing. There's another thing that was very important up here, and they were called rock fences, slide fences.
yeah,
And they were hooked up to the signal circuits. And so that if the gravel came down or rocks came down, it would turn the block signal to red, which the train has to stop. The train can, after a certain amount of time, can proceed again, but only at speeds that he can stop before running into another train or run into this thing. So those slide fences were the
Lifesavers, at
road
least.
crews and the signal crew, and they had to go out there and they had to clear all that off there for that train. This is really hard work, and it could be at any time in a 24-hour period.
Anytime. Here we have a picture of the Hyack substation, and we're gonna dive into this a little bit deeper here. Next photo. Now, the best part about this picture is you guys know who that truck belonged to, don't you? Whose truck was that, Frank?
Well, that had to be around 69.
Actually, these are 71, April 71.
What?
Yeah, April 29th, 71 are the dates on the pictures.
71, okay.
Yeah, so pretty close.
Yeah, because that's the relief operator's pickup. And
Because you know,
that's how I know that. But yeah, we used to have a lot of problems there. People love to get their take photographs of the substation, and they'd like to get up, put their friends or they put their wife up against the wall, and I take the pictures and all these stalactites hanging down there. But,
oh, yeah.
And we had a terrible time because, especially if the substation would run, and if you ran the substation, like for this train here, it would heat up the ceiling and the snow would slide off and the stalactites would fall down to the ground. It was pretty dangerous. It was hard to keep people out of there. But the snow sometimes would be, you'd have to slide into that door, that office door. You'd have to almost slide in to get into it. That's how high snow could be.
well, you look and see how high that foundation sits, and this is a picture taken in late April, and you look at all the snow up there at this point in time.
The other thing about this station here that you can see those insulators, those 3 insulators sticking down there. Well, that's because they're taking the 115,000 volts through the substation, whereas the pictures you saw of Cedar Falls, the wiring came from the outside and just operated the substation. But this is transported right through the substation, and that could be very complicated at times during electrical times because electricity doesn't go through the wire. The wire is just a conductor, and the electricity is in a corona or like a donut over a wire. And depending on the size of the charge gives you the idea of the outside diameter of the donut. So if you have a power surge that's really, really close to you like they had at Renton at one time, then that donut could be, let's say, 2 feet in diameter, and the hole going through there is only 4 inches. So how are you going to get that? How's that lightning going to get through that hole because it wants to go to ground? So it blows a hole in the brick wall.
Whoa!
3-foot diameter hole at Renton.
So here, let's watch this train come up the hill. This is just coming out of the tunnel at Hyack eastbound, heading for Clay Elum.
So
Yes.
operation-wise, so the train just came out of the tunnel. So the operator, Bill Bibby was his name, at Hyack, he would call me
Text.
right away, ring, 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 and hey, Frank, he's coming out of the hole. So, okay. So then I shut down, and I can maybe go home or
Sleep
clean
in
up.
your camper or something.
I might have to clean up a mess. There's always a mess at Cedar Falls. But so then the other thing Bill would do, he would automatically start the substation at Clay Elum, because at that time, Clay Elum became an automated station. And then Bill was always one who was pretty quick to get out of there. So if the train was pretty close to Clay Elum, he would shut everything down. And he lived in Renton, so he'd just drive home.
And here we see this train coming through here. We'll kind of slip through here. Now, Frank, you told me a story about these transmission lines and the snowplows. What happened there?
So the snowplow Cecil Gearhart would be on what's called the cut widener, and that was like maybe a bulldozer. It looked like a bulldozer with, instead of a straight blade, it had a V blade like this, and it pushed snow over to the side. And it quite often went in conjunction with a rotary. So the rotary was a diesel engine, or it could be electric engine that would throw the snow like this and way up onto the bank. And at Hyack, the traveling engineer, Wayne Ferrier, he'd always get pretty exuberant coming out of the tunnel to make that really nice looking snowbanks there, you know. So he'd shoot that snow up there to beat heck. And he would hit way over in the corner here, you can see the 115,000 volts. So that's 3 wires, it's 3 phase. And so the snow would go up there and maybe slap those wires together and trip out everybody. The whole Hyack would go black, Easton would go black. And then
Frank
so
scrambling, driving up there, figuring out what's going on.
So who has to go fix it? Yeah, so Frank gets called and says, hey, Frank, you got to go up there. Well, the pass is closed. He says, well, see if you can get up there. Yeah, so anyway, I would drive up there. Sometimes where you see the snow shed now, I'd get whacked with a little snow slide. But so then I'd go up there and re-energize the oil circuit breaker so the community could have power.
So here that train that Jeff Moreau has been following, we saw it is now coming into Clay Elum, and this is now Cascade Rail Foundation's heritage site, which we operate as a partnership with Washington State Parks. So we'll just take a quick look at a couple of pictures of the train here arriving, and this was a crew change point, so we're going to see the old crew get off and the new crew get on.
So this was an important spot from the standpoint of work hours. You're all, at one time, train crews weren't required to work any more than 16 hours, and then they had to be relieved. And then they changed that to 12 hours. And so Cle Elum here was the halfway point between Tacoma and Othello. And so the train crews had to be replaced. And if the train crew, say, was at Hyack and they had their 12 hours of service was up, they had to shut the train down. And somebody like me would have to go up there in a international travel hall and pick that crew up and take them to Cle Elum and bring a fresh crew from Cle Elum to put them on that train. And get a load of this. So the conductor that was on that train, he is paid until the caboose gets to the location of that train.
Oh, yeah. These are a couple of pictures by a very, very famous Canadian photographer, Doug Cummings, and I'm very grateful that we had the opportunity to look at these. You know, we see this is that modified box cab. It's a little bit more customized on the front, and you can see also that he's going a pretty good clip, isn't he, Alan? He looks like he's got a little brake smoke flying, doesn't he?
Yeah, he come down the hill plenty hot.
Yeah, coming down a little hot. So now we'll get into some of these vintage pictures from around this area. These are from the Walt Ainsworth collection at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. And this is, where are we, Alan?
Well, we're right here in good old Maple Valley.
We're right here in good old Maple Valley, ladies and gentlemen.
That was the second depot at Maple Valley. I have a photo over in my photo album of the original board and batten building that was there. This was built after the Milwaukee connected up to the Pacific Coast Railroad with their Pacific Extension. And this was a joint depot between the Milwaukee and the Pacific Coast Railroad. So the Milwaukee, I think, paid for it, and it's built to a Milwaukee standard design.
Okay, so this bipolar locomotive is like a caterpillar. You can see Caterpillar's got a million legs, looks like a million legs to manipulate. So every one of the axles on this locomotive is wound electric motor on the axle. And when the passenger service was shut down for lack of, because of the construction of the highways, then they tried to use these locomotives for freight, but they were geared too high. and they would just spin the wheels. They couldn't gear low enough to develop a bite or traction to be able to move 100 tons of freight or something like that. So they ended up just scrapping them.
I think that maybe one's preserved in maybe St. Louis, Missouri or something. So.
They were very fast engines though, because engineers would make a bet with the brakeman that he'd stand at the front of that engine and he'd start out and he wouldn't be able to grab the ladder on the other end of it. And most times they couldn't, it was going too fast.
And if they were coming out of the hole, so Cedar Falls had a passing track. The passing track was right next to the substation, and then you had the main line. And so the conductor that would be on here, or the rule is when the train pulls out of the siding, and then it gets on the main line, that the conductor is to line the switch back to the main. You can't leave a switch lined up to a siding. And so the conductor would come into the substation. He said, "Hey, highball the gate for me when I hit the big iron." Oh, what'd that mean? So I would then go out there so that the train could maintain movement forward without stopping, so this person could go out and line the switch, because if he lined the switch, he can catch up with the train. And so I'd go out there and line the switch for him.
The vintage shot here in downtown Maple Valley. A couple more photos. We're almost done, folks. But this one, this running shot along the Maple Valley Highway, I mean, that's iconic picture with the crew and somebody sitting in the back seat. Pacing shot, you know, I just needed to throw that in there. Another picture with the new Maple Valley.
The new depot.
Depot from the Burlington Northern era. A couple of more famous pictures. I want to say the bottom one is by John Hill because he was like me. He always liked putting his kids in the picture.
That could be one of my kids.
And then this one, now tomorrow, if anybody's around, Frank and I are going to be back at the Renton History Museum in downtown Renton. And it used to be a fire station. And then this picture here in the bottom is now the junction of the Maple Valley Highway, and 405 would be going right through that picture now. So a few more. These are Renton pictures of downtown Renton along, oh gosh, what is that? Hauser
Way.
Hauser Way, yeah, right. Running right down the street, iconic.
That's where I saw my first electric Milwaukee train, was on Hauser Way. I was lost down there, and I was driving down there at night, and I saw a headlight coming at me and realized it was a train. And my wife was freaking out because I was playing chicken with it, and then I finally got out of its way, and it had a set of box cab motors on it.
So just as a marketing note, for those of you that haven't gotten your copy of the Pacific Coast book, isn't this picture in the Pacific Coast book, Dick? Yeah, I think so too. That's a great shot, you know.
That's a spring switch. That's what the SS stands for there. It's a switch that you didn't have to line. You could just drive out of it and it would automatically close.
So you know what this car is called? You probably call it a caboose. It's called a crummy.
A crummy.
On the railroad, it's a crummy.
Yeah, on a crummy, yeah. Pacific Coast going by a steam engine, going by a set of box cabs at downtown Renton. Just great stuff. Great stuff. We're coming to the end here. A couple more. And here's a couple more Doug Cummings pictures of, in color. We saw that train going through Cedar Falls. Now we see it again. And the best part of this picture, of course, is this guy with his camper thinking that he can just, I think we could squeeze through there, you know. I think they survived, you know, this beautiful sort of modified box cab set. And we're into the credits now. So our presentation today was Electrifying Tales of Cedar Falls, Cascade Rail Foundation, and the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, with our special guests, Frank and Alan, our guys. And this was, to me, one of the best parts of the whole presentation, is I was able to get photographs of the photographers that contributed their images to our presentation today. Richard Steinheimer, courtesy of the Center for Railroad Photography and Art in Madison, Wisconsin. a world-famous photographer, one of the greats of the 20th century. And then Blair Koistra, and we like this one so much because we see Blair back in the day when he was actually taking pictures there, and we see Blair now today, who is a BNSF dispatcher in Fort Worth, Texas, and he's up there walking the trail, holding a picture of himself walking along the main line back in the day. Just great stuff. And this is the one that I said, because this is a picture of Jeff Moreau, and these are really hard to come by. And I thought, well, if I've got Jeff Moreau, I could get the rest of these people. And so Jeff Moreau, his ashes are spread at the Orange Empire Railroad Museum in Paris, California, because he was a traction guy. He liked these electric locomotives. And finally, Doug Cummings. Doug, a very famous photographer from Vancouver, British Columbia area. Very grateful to Dale Sanders of White River Productions and to the Cummings family for providing these images and letting us enjoy these images today. I want to thank our partners, Maple Valley Historical, Dick Peacock, Mark from Maple Valley Community Center, Renton Historical tomorrow, the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, Cedar Falls Watershed, they let Frank and I go in there on a tour and shoot some video. Washington State Historical Society, they contributed a number of images to our program, and Washington State Parks, our partner with Cascade Rail Foundation at South Clay Elm. And a special help to Aaron Rose of CRPA for the help with the Steinheimer images. That was a big deal. The important thing now is the credits. Joshua Wiersma, who's back there on the control panel, our videographer extraordinaire, and we've got a ton of this stuff, more interviews with these guys on YouTube. Josh shot all that stuff for us too. Craig Thorpe worked on it, Aaron's worked on it, Robert Scott worked on it, Virginia Wright, Executive Director of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, did all of the artwork for this, and I was the guy that had this idea that we needed to do this. So I want to thank everybody for watching, and please, please support your local historical association. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed today's program, and let's give our special guests a big round of applause for being here.